Welcome to Praxis, a podcast where we explore how to practice and embody the way of Jesus in our everyday lives. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen. Right now, we're in a series on authenticity. While authenticity is enjoying a moment in the cultural spotlight right now, its value is nothing new. It's deeply rooted in the biblical vision of being fully known and fully loved. As human beings created in the image of God, we are wired for relationship. We were made to know and to be known. And yet, so often, we hide, we perform, and we manage impressions by burying our weakness. Slowly, we begin living divided and inauthentic lives. The truth is, real relationships are impossible while hiding. Genuine connection requires courage, the willingness to show up vulnerably and authentically. So in this series, we're exploring what authenticity is, what gets in the way of it, and what it takes to pursue it in our relationship with God, with ourselves, and with others. Today, we want to discuss the religious false self. Let's get into it.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Josiah.
I am Mac.
And I'm Katie.
And it's great to be back.
It is.
It's great to be back. For our discussion today, I wanted to ask you all a question. We're at the age where, I don't know about you, but in my mind, subconsciously, I like to think of myself as still like a younger person. But I realize that my age as a number is making me older, and then there's some things that are making me seem probably older. So I was curious, what's one of the things that even as like a young, quote unquote, younger person, you find yourself doing that makes you an older person?
Is this about Mac pressing the buttons?
No. Actually, I was thinking more for myself. I found myself getting slightly excited that it's supposed to rain this weekend, so my lawn will look better.
That's old.
That makes me old. So something like that, like something, shamelessly admit that, hey, this makes me getting older. I'm not young anymore.
Well, I've gotten really into bird watching.
Oh, that is.
And yeah, my husband Alex tells me that makes me seem old. But it's fun. I'm really enjoying it.
Wow. My mom is really into birds.
Well,
and
she and I should hang out.
Yeah. For her birthday this year, which is in January, I purchased her one of those bird feeders that have a camera on it.
Wait, when's her birthday?
It's in January.
And when did you purchase it?
I purchased it in January for her birthday.
It doesn't mean she had to put it out in January.
Right.
Oh, I thought you were saying it's coming up in January and you already purchased it.
Nope, this is past tense.
I was like, wow, you're very intense about
I do love gifts. I love
gifts.
giving gifts. I am a gift giver.
7 months early.
Yeah, welcome to the conversation, Josiah. So we got her this bird feeder that has a camera in it, and when a bird lands, it takes a picture of it and sends it to her phone.
That's cool.
It is pretty neat. And I keep putting my head right by the bird feeder so that when I'm over there, it sends her a picture of my face.
That's funny. Well, Deb in our office showed me this app called Merlin. And you basically just put it on and it listens. You can either take a picture of a bird and it identifies it for you, or you just hit the record button and it listens to all the birds and it tells you what birds are around you. And you guys know our backyard is like tons of trees. So I'll go out there and within like a couple minutes, we'll have like 15 to 20 different birds that are in my backyard.
Wow.
It's really fun.
You are getting old. I'm older than both of you, and so I've been in this stage for a while. And perhaps the biggest thing for me that I noticed with regard to my age, a couple things. One is I can get injured pretty easily now compared to when I was like, I will wake up and be like, why does this hurt?
Yeah.
All I did was sleep. What is happening here, And so bodily ailments are more frequent, I would say. In terms of interests, here's one of the things I noticed about my grandparents, but also Josie's grandparents. They were obsessed with the next meal. So like the entire world involved around eating and what you were going to eat next. So here's what we're having for breakfast tomorrow. And then they eat breakfast. And after, while you're cleaning up, here's when lunch is going to be. And this is what we're having. And then, you know what I mean? It's like,
yes.
But I do notice that like, I I will ask Josie before I leave, hey, which one are we going to eat for dinner tonight? Like, and then I look forward to it all day. I'm getting old.
I remember, she's passed now, but my great aunt and my grandma both lived in like a senior facility. Well, no, it was like assisted living type of apartment, but they lived in the same building. And so as a kid, you would just ride your bike over there and hang out in the summer. They were fun. But I just remember if she had more than one appointment for something in a week, she would always say, she'd be like, she'd be like, no, I can't go do this. Like talking to my dad, like, I can't go do this, Paul. Like, I've got a haircut appointment on Thursday. My week is shot.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
My week is shot.
Oh, well, speaking of getting old and haircut appointments, during our last episode, I called a little bit of an audible. We ran out of time. Mm-hmm. We were discussing the false self. And so we decided to postpone this conversation or make it its own episode. So maybe just to catch our listeners up in case you missed the last episode, the false self, and we're borrowing here from Robert Mulholland Jr. in his book, The Deeper Journey, and I would highly recommend it. He defines the false self as a self-referenced way of being in the world. So your false self is a carefully constructed identity that we develop to survive life apart from deep trust and relationship with God. It's not who we truly are in Christ. So it's really important that we remember that authenticity is about living into God's design. So our false self is not that design, but it's who we learn to be in order to feel secure, loved, feel safe and in control or significant apart from God's presence in our lives. And our false self is formed through these early wounds, these unmet needs, our family systems, family of origin, first formation, and even cultural expectations. And we end up organizing our behavior around self-protection and self-promotion, wearing masks and erecting walls, hustling and hiding. And last episode, Josiah, you used this, it's a biblical metaphor of fig leaves that sort of carried our conversation, which I really liked, that we use these fig leaves. Some are performative, some are protective, but we don't just have like one or two protecting our private areas, right? We are covered in fig leaves. We have all these different ways of hiding and hustling in order to carefully curate this false self. And when I was reading Mulholland's book, The Deeper Journey, I got through the first chapter where he outlines the 8 characteristics we discussed in our last episode on the false self. And quite frankly, that chapter in and of itself felt sort of like a kick in the nuts. You know what I mean? Like a total or a punch to the ovaries, Katie.
Thanks.
It's just like
inclusive language.
Yeah. It's just sort of like, it was hard. It's hard-hitting stuff. You don't read those characteristics and be like, oh, I don't struggle with any of these. Like, it's sort of like this mirror moment where you're looking at these characteristics being like, well, crap. Yeah, this stuff runs deep. And then I read the second chapter, which I think it was entitled The Religious False Self. And in the first few paragraphs, somewhere he says this. He goes, the essential characteristics of the religious false self are exactly the same as those of the false self.
Uh-oh.
The essential difference between a false self and a religious false self is that the latter brings God into its life. And I had to put the book down, right? Because basically what he's saying is the old self, the false self, is still fully operable. It's still in operation. It's still in the driver's seat. The only difference now is that we sort of brought God into our life. But we're doing things now with a construct of who we think God is to use for our purposes, or we're doing things in the name of God, which gives us like the rationalization or justification to keep going and not feel conviction around it. So what we want to do in today's episode, once again, sort of leaning very heavily on Mulholland, is walk through those 8 characteristics now, showing how the religious false self shows up. We're going to review these 8 characteristics we talked about in the last episode, but show how they take sort of they take on a religious character, it's the false self, the old self with a spiritual veneer on top, but it's still problematic and insidious.
Yeah. And hearing you describe that, it feels like the religious false self could be especially deceptive, right? Because you're basically saying, hey, we're doing the same things. We've got the same fig leaves that block our authenticity, but yet they have the name God and spiritual language all over them. So we feel like we're living into who God designed us to be because we're talking about all sorts of religious things. But to me, that as you describe that, I'm like, wow, that feels like something it could be very deceptive.
Right. And this is, I think once you have eyes to see this, that we have a false self. And then when we put our faith in God, the false self still can be operable and it becomes a religious false self. This will open up, I think, new possibilities in exploring Jesus's beef with the Pharisees and the religious leaders, because over and over and over again, essentially that's what he's doing, is saying, hey, you're still operating out of the false self. You're just doing it in God's name. And the outside looks really good because you're wearing fig leaves and they appear spiritual. You appear godly, but in fact, the inside is filthy and full of bones and needs to be cleaned out, right? We need a new self. You need to be born again. You need to be transformed from the inside out.
Yeah. You know, a little bit to your point, Katie, there's this very subversive way of relating to the religious false self in that we actually take things that are clearly wrong or bad or effects of sin and we turn them as like into like godly wisdom. So we can convince ourselves that we're not only doing, like, we're living into our false self, but because it's baptized in the language and in the culture of maybe whatever Christian circle we're in, we convince ourselves we're actually doing the right thing when we're living out of a false self that God's never asked us to live out of.
That's right.
And maybe we can just use this as a transition into some of these characteristics. To start with some, when I'm looking back at the last episode, we're going to be going over the same characteristics that we did for the false self, but we're sort of looking at what it looks like for this to show up in the religious false self. And the first one is just being fearful. Mm-hmm. So if the false self, if the fig leaf in that way is the world feels unsafe, there's threats everywhere, we live braced, hidden, and guarded, and withhold, we do the same thing and we just baptize it in something else, in our religious false self. And I think that, and this is where I'm talking about where it sort of twists to be, if we're living out of fear as a part of our false self, it can actually look like wisdom to live out of fear and isolate ourselves as Christians from other people, or we hoard things and call it wisdom, things like that. So it's like fear is supposed to be, is something God doesn't want us to live out of, like it's a fig leaf, but we've sort of like drawn a cross over the top of the fig leaf, and now fear can be something that we can wear, and it makes us look more Christian.
In our last episode, when we were talking about fear, we talked about kind of constructing an identity around something we're good at. And I shared how I'm noticing that a little bit in my son Kier with baseball. And we had a conversation about how like baseball involves failure. You're not going to get up and, hit a home run every time. And so if you think that your identity is on the line with every pitch or every at bat, well, then it creates this dynamic where if you do well, my self-worth increases, I'm good. But if you strike out, like it's an identity crisis. So bring the same dynamic And then think about a religious context. And of course, I'm a pastor, and so I often am thinking about what it looks like to do ministry in a healthy way. And I've observed a lot of different people and how they do ministry and so on. Take that same mentality and then think about a Sunday morning with preaching. Like, I know quite a few, or at least have observed over the years, pastors who treat the Sunday sermon like an at-bat with their identity on the line. And if they speak eloquently with charisma and do beautiful exegesis and their words sort of strike a chord in people's hearts and it's a home run. Yeah. If it has the impact, if their performance and the impact is something that they feel good about, that somehow increases their identity, their sense of self-worth. Yeah? But if they don't hit a home run on Sunday morning with their sermon, well, then all of a sudden they get the Monday blues, they're down in the dumps. Well, what's on the line is every sermon is sort of, there's an identity component involved.
Yeah.
If I do well, my identity increases. If I suck, well, it's an identity crisis. And notice now that we've essentially taken the same false self, earning identity through performance, and now we're just doing it in a religious context for God, serving the church. But it's the same dynamic. It's the same dynamic. What would it look like instead to get up and preach knowing your identity isn't on the line? That no matter how well you do or don't do, God's love for you remains the same. And you're actually orienting to it not to prove something or to get something, but to simply join God's work in that moment in the life of your community. That's a different way of orienting.
Yeah, so when we talk about fear, it feels like a fear of disappointing God or losing our identity, right? What would you name it as? Like a fear of?
Well, I would say in that instant, it's the fear of being insignificant. Like underneath this dynamic is I'm not enough as I am, and so I need to do something or achieve something or perform in a certain way in order to feel value and significance. And what I'm saying is that if you look at how that shows up apart from Jesus, there's all sorts of ways people do that. Not just sports, but their career and so on and so forth. An endless list of ways we see that happening. What often happens, though, is that people come to faith and that same default is still in full operation. They're not getting their full value, worth, and significance from Jesus. And so now they're trying to accrue it or get it through religious performance.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this last week, that fear is it underlies a lot of these that we're going to talk about. So fear becomes sort of the motivator for being protective or possessive or manipulating some of this often. And if we don't have a firm identity in who we are, in who God is, then we start doing all those protective and the fearful measures like we talked about last week. And in church, somehow we baptize those into looking into sort of creating a whole nother layer of performance that ends up going along with it.
Right. And I realize that depending on who you are as a listener, like you might have to do some work to connect that to your own life. Because I'm a pastor, so I'm sharing with you the work I've done to think about this. But like, if you're a worship leader, like Josiah, like you could see how, okay, if I perfectly hit that falsetto, right, then bam, my identity skyrockets. Or, you know what I mean?
Like everybody had their hands raised today.
And
not feel like I was, significant.
Right.
Well, and Josiah, you and I both lead, well, Mac, you too, we lead year-long leadership intensives. And think about, what comes to mind for me is the fear of being exposed that bubbles up in those groups.
Yeah.
And how many times are we sitting with someone, or frankly experiencing ourselves, where there's a desire to look spiritual out of fear that I might be exposed as not spiritual and not having together. For example, let's say someone is really worried about something and really anxious, but in their mind, if I say that I'm anxious, then maybe it'll come across like I don't trust God. So I'm going to say like, nope, of course, God's got this. I trust God. Like they may present something that's not true to how they're really feeling out of fear that if I show where I'm really at, I'm going to be seen as not a good Christian, or I'm not trusting God enough, or I'm not as far along as I should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Totally. And if you want to get underneath how much this one is active in your life, just spend some time in Psalm 23, where it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And consider that God is your shepherd who is with you every moment, who knows your needs better than you do, and is eager to provide for you as a good father. And then just walk through life noticing how often things are happening around you or in you that create fear and cause you to try to manipulate God or operate out of self-sufficiency to get your own needs met. And I'll just say, it's a lot,
Yeah.
right? Fear grips us, and we then, out of distrust, try to control God or take things into our own hands rather than simply remaining surrendered in love.
Yeah. That's a good word.
Let's get to the next
Yeah,
one.
closely related to fear, I would say the word protective comes to mind. And again, I think it's closely related because when we are fearful of being insignificant or being exposed or losing our worth, losing our identity, well, we're going to be really protective of those fig leaves that feel like they're securing the thing we're scared of losing, right? So if my performance is my self-worth, then I'm going to become really protective over that fig leaf of performance, because if it's removed, all of a sudden, then I feel like I don't have worth anymore. I think this is in the last episode where I talked about Gollum and said Star Wars. Yeah. It's embarrassing.
I
Gosh,
told
how
Drew
embarrassing
he was
for me.
mortified.
Please don't.
Yeah.
Why would you tell Drew?
He needs to know. He needs
Gosh,
to
those
know.
are like,
So
he's like,
funny.
I feel like he likes Lord of the Rings and Star Wars better
He
than
does.
anyone, more than anyone I know.
He does.
I'm gonna have to really work on regaining my credibility with him.
Yep. You're going to have to clean up your mess with Drew, because that
I think I am.
some
If you're listening,
deep
Drew,
distrust.
I'm really sorry. So yeah, we're clinging on to these fig leaves because, again, if I feel like who I present to the world is this, okay, here's where my mind goes, especially if we're working in ministry, right? All three of us work in ministry. How many times have we read stories of someone who works in ministry that's struggling with something, but they don't feel like they can be honest about it. And so then they become really protective to try to hold together this self-image, and then eventually it spirals and it all falls apart. But for example, like the podcast about, is it Mars Hill?
Yeah, the rise and fall of Mars Hill.
Yeah, the rise and fall of Mars Hill. The pastor, Mark Driscoll, had this huge following, huge church, multi-campus church. It was a national figure. But behind the scenes, in this podcast, you see how he gets very protective of maintaining the image he's maintaining. And anyone who threatens that image is pushed out.
Yep.
Like he pushed people off the board or just kind of ousted them from the community or ruined their reputation because they were threatening what he saw as vital to his image and ultimately his self-worth.
Josiah brought up in the last episode, you kind of use the addiction metaphor of someone who's addicted. If they have an addiction to something, they become really protective of that thing. And Katie, I hear you saying the same thing, using a ministry example. When someone has got junk in their life, they work really hard to hide it and protect the thing they've built because it's so central to who they are. And yeah, I think you can see that dynamic. One of the areas I've spent a lot of time studying and researching, given that something similar happened here, is just that dynamic as clergy malpractice and abuse, and the dynamics around that, and what you're naming is there, I would argue, probably close to 100% of the time, right? And then when it's brought to light, and we've talked about this in previous episodes with our series on Church Called Tove, when we're going through that book, usually the board responds not by truth-telling and naming what's happening and how they're responding to it. Usually they respond by blaming the victim to protect the organization and somehow trying to preserve momentum and reputation of the church, which is no bueno, right? One of the ways I notice protection taking on a religious tone with the fig leaf of protection is dogmatic certainty. I think that one of the things I notice when people come to faith is they have some new convictions about who God is, who Jesus is, what he's done for them, which are great. And what can end up happening, though, is that people sort of construct a theological system and end up feeling very certain about those convictions. And sort of like what you were saying, Katie, anytime that's threatened, they become angry and protective. And I actually think that's sort of a symptom of sort of fragility and immaturity around their beliefs rather than being able to hold those with humility and conviction at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in general, if open dialogue and conversations with people who see things differently than you
threatens you.
Yeah. If that's a sign of maturity to be able to have a mature conversation with someone who you might disagree with. And if someone was immature in that, it would be easy to see. But I think what I hear you saying is that in church, it can actually flip the script where the person who is unwilling to have conversations about and have open dialogue and maybe discuss differing theological ideas or doctrines and things. Someone who isn't willing to discuss that and is more dogmatic can sometimes be seen as more mature. And I think that's worth pointing out that that's not true. It's just it's a fig leaf.
Right.
And we just put a cross on it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think we did an episode on the problem of dogmatism or something,
We did.
and how we police beliefs and sort of force people to conform to a certain way of thinking. And yes, what I'm naming is that is a fig leaf of the religious false self rooted in fear and protection. Fear, what if people believe differently than I do? Or, and protective, we have to believe these things. We got to kind of hold the line and so on and so forth. And yes, to your point, Josiah, people who can get really passionate about what they believe and sort of appear uncompromising often are associated with strength. Mm-hmm. And I think you're asking the question, is that really strength or is it insecurity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? That the third characteristic we talked about, or that Mulholland lists, is possessiveness. So you'll remember our false self tries to secure life by grasping, controlling, and holding on. Again, that image of Gollum turned in on himself, like he's all decrepit and deformed and sort of hunched over, protecting the thing that he currently possesses, namely the ring. And when he loses it, he's obsessed with regaining it. And again, in a religious false self, now we just become possessive of, our religious identity, the things that we've used to curate it and craft it. Again, I'm a pastor, so I'm mostly paying attention, at least in my own life, and how does this show up in ministry contexts? And what I notice is that some pastors, when they work really hard to, quote, build the church, they construct their identity around being a successful pastor. It's almost like their identity as a person gets transferred to being a pastor, which then gets equated with or transferred to the church. So I am the church that I lead. And then they grasp and they cling and they hold on to that as the foundation of their identity. And this often shows up in the language they use. I've heard pastors say things like, my ministry, right? The ministry they've been called to sort of belongs to them. Or my church, as if the church that they serve belongs to them. They own it. Or my people, as if the people who comprise their community, the congregants, belong to them. Or my vision, as if what God is calling this local community into to be faithful either starts with them or belongs to them. And then I think it shows up, when that's your mentality, it can show up behaviorally as well. So I'm naming some of the language, but it also can show up behaviorally. One example is the pulpit. I've noticed that folks who often have this particular fig leaf of possessiveness in a religious false self, they only share the pulpit when they need a break, right? And ironically, it usually happens on the holiday weekends like Memorial Day and 4th of July and so on. Or they take credit or success when things are going well because that boosts their identity. But of course, they blame other staff and so on when things are going poorly. Now, again, if you're listening to this, most of our listeners probably aren't in ministry. Some are, but think about how this can show up if you're not in pastoral ministry. I've noticed people say things like, well, God told me, right? Or so it's kind of like God is on my side, right? Or I've noticed people who are in an unhealthy relationship but want to continue in it. Like, God gave me this relationship. Like, we're doing what we've talked about before of like using God's name in vain, right? We're using God language to justify our decisions and to promote ourselves, right? So anyways, it shows up in sort of a possessive control where we're using God to justify the things we're doing.
Bless our agenda.
Yeah, I wonder, I can think of lots of church leader examples too. Like I would imagine that this is a primary motivator as to why some church leadership have a hard time passing the torch down to another generation of leadership, is because there's a possessiveness around like this being our thing, and wanting to include the next generation into the leadership can be difficult because you're letting it go to something else.
Well, not just letting it go, but things aren't static. The things are changing at a rapid rate. And so oftentimes, you're right, there's a possessiveness where we don't want to hand things over because we don't want to like loosen our grip of control. But we also don't want things to change. And yet reality is changing, which means how the church is expressing or meeting that reality needs to change. And that makes us fearful. Now we're back into that fear deal, where we get all messed up, right?
Yeah. Maybe for an example outside of like the church leadership spectrum, I mean, many of us lead families, and I think that many of us can see how, at least I can see how possessiveness can sort of eke its way into how I parent my kids and how I lead my family. And sometimes within the Christian circles, we baptize this into a way that makes us look smart and wise, that we get possessive. Like, these are my kids, this is my family, and making decisions as such, when ultimately, a lot of times that's driven out of a fear to either protect from something bad happening, or being possessive of, as if like these kids are really my kids. And I don't know about you, but I have to remind myself of this a lot. We discuss it in our home. It's like, hey, first and foremost, these are God's children, and we're stewards of that. And so there's like a healthy open-handedness. So like, hey, these are human beings made in God's image, and they're going to become who you've created them to be. And there's only so much control I have over that.
That's the dynamic that you just named, is the difference between stewardship and ownership. Anytime with this particular fig leaf, anytime we shift into an ownership type posture for God, that's when this fig leaf in the religious false self is in full operation.
Yeah. And if you think you don't struggle with it, what I would say is observe the patterns of your kids' behavior. Because if them behaving properly, it's going to make you feel good, right?
Yeah,
I'm getting identity from it.
Our kids can feel like a reflection of us, right? In any context. And I think sometimes even more so in a Christian community.
Oh, yeah.
Like whether it's happening or not, I can feel like I'm being sort of judged or evaluated based on how my kids are doing. So certainly I can see that dynamic at play, and how it might lead to us to feel possessive over something that, like you said, Mac, we're called to steward, not own or control, because we can't anyways.
Yeah, and you'll know if you're into this, if you're wading into this fig leaf and you're sowing it on, because you'll know as soon as they misbehave how much of an identity crisis it is. There's something going on with my kids. What's wrong with me? What did I do wrong as a parent? When ultimately it's like, well, it's the child's behavior, and as they're growing up, like, they're going to have to figure that out without me. So what does it look like without grasping for the control of their behavior? It's tricky.
Yeah, I certainly don't have it figured out.
Oh, that's surprising to me.
I'll let you know when I do, though. Okay. Maybe I'll write a book.
Another one on the list is manipulative. And I'm remembering back to last week, we talked about everyone manipulates to a certain degree. There's a certain amount of manipulation that happens psychologically in order to get your needs met. So some of that happens very subconsciously. And the false self essentially is seeking its own gain even at the cost of others. So I guess that's what I would name as manipulation. It's like you're seeking something for yourself at the cost of someone else. So you're manipulating something out. You're getting a better deal than the other person, essentially. And so the religious false self, this can often have even a more sinister outcome, I would say, is because that ability to manipulate can be seen as an influence of leadership. And when you're doing it for God, it becomes even that more important. And how much easier is it to look past the negative aspects or the negative impact it has on some if you can see all the good work it's doing for the kingdom.
Mm-hmm. You gave us a definition of manipulation.
That was off the cuff, so if it's wrong, feel free to
No, let's just use it. I want to go with it. But I have a question for us to banter about for a moment. You gave us a definition of manipulation, something along the lines of sort of acting on someone else at cost to them in a way that's advantageous to me, right? Something like that. But then you talked about how in a religious environment, we can leverage leadership influence in ways that are manipulative. And that surfaces for me, what's the difference between manipulation and influence?
Should I take a stab?
Yeah, go.
Here comes the Enneagram 3 Katie raising my hand in the front row.
Well, yeah, and the Enneagram 4 me is finding very facetious ways of bringing it up. So, and okay. I feel a little more, what's the word? I feel cynical about this topic.
Great.
So
Should I go first?
So you can go first.
Okay, great. I'll give the test answer. You can give the real answer. No, I guess as you're saying that, my mind goes to if influencing someone towards their good, like wanting their good, in a way that could be at cost to me. We've talked about this concept before. Mm-hmm. Manipulation would be influencing them for my good.
Yeah, so the telos or goal of manipulation is self-serving, whereas influence is about serving, equipping, empowering others. Self versus others would be maybe one delineation.
Yeah.
Anything else? Just curious.
Yeah. No, I think it.
You've got that cynical look on your face.
I know.
Bring it.
I mean, it can feel a little bit like all desire to influence is really manipulating someone to do something they wouldn't have done if you didn't influence them to do it. Mm-hmm. So is it always self-serving? No, but it is inherently. Well, I guess if we're going off of the definition we're using, it doesn't have to be manipulative, but
I would want to distinguish between influence and manipulation. I think that God seeks to influence us, but I don't think that God manipulates us. To me, manipulation carries some degree of coercion and in acting on someone else that actually violates their agency, that seeks to overtake their agency for a self-serving purpose. Whereas influence is more about leveraging the say-so that I have in someone else's life that they've given to me to inspire them or move them in a direction that is towards their design, towards a kingdom end, towards flourishing and wholeness in a way that gives them permission to choose it or to submit to it or to surrender to it or to act on it. So in other words, at least that's the way I make sense of it, is manipulation is inherently coercive and controlling and self-serving, whereas influence, at least the way I'm thinking about it, is about actually using the say-so someone else has given me in their life to encourage them in a positive direction that they get to choose and submit to.
Yeah, I like that distinction. That makes sense. And given where you were headed, Josiah, it makes me wonder, are there times in my life where I feel like I'm influencing, but I'm actually manipulating?
I'm sure there are for all of us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the wires often get crossed and manipulation is so ingrained in our false self. But to your point, Josiah, I just think these types of delineations are really important so that we can have clarity about what's going on in us and between us, that then shines the spotlight on that is the false self versus that is a new self that I'm operating out of in Christ. And so many, again, I'm a pastor, I coach pastors, I think about this a lot. This is one of the major ones that I unpack in my coaching with clients, is they're often manipulating their staff or manipulating people in their church towards what they believe to be a kingdom end. But the means don't justify the ends. One of the ways I notice this showing up with people in general, but pastors in particular, especially with this attractional model of church ministry, which we've unpacked before, central to that model of ministry is sort of a charismatic leader at the center of the entire thing. And what I've noticed with these charismatic leaders is not only do they have some we're all probably on the spectrum of narcissism, but they have a lot of those characteristics. And with that comes like a gravitational pull. Wherever they go, they seem to be able to pull people into their orbit who then sort of get on board with the things that they're passionate about or the things that they're doing. And oftentimes that's celebrated as like, this is God's leader for our church. This person's anointed, right? But underneath it is, this person is just operating out of a false self in the name of God and controlling and manipulating people who are reporting to that individual to appear really good.
Yeah. My cynicalness is not, cynicism is more on the lines of how much manipulation happens within Christian leadership, and I'm not just talking about big leaders.
Yeah.
I'm talking about even in the smaller areas of how it can seem like it is very self-sacrificial, but ultimately it's still more coercion and control. I think of a few things. So sometimes we can manipulate others and call it like a mentoring relationship. Mm-hmm. We're mentoring someone, being in that sort of place, being in that place in someone's life and having say so. I think that it takes a lot of humility to not do it. And like, hey, I see something for your life and I want you to do the thing that I think is right for you. It goes from being a spiritual guide to someone to more of like you're manipulating.
Anytime you have a group of people coming together where 2 or 3 are gathered, not only is Christ there, but manipulation is present.
Yeah, there's a mess.
You just look at your small group, look at elder teams, look at, whatever the environment is, and it usually is going to involve the definition we talked about, which is like acting on someone else to get something we want that violates their free will or their agency.
Yeah. We secure religious and church outcomes by forcing people in our lives to think like we do. Mm-hmm. Leveraging fear tactics to win converts. When a church leader becomes authoritarian and forceful, we can label them as a gifted leader or an apostle, rather than just being a jerk.
And Mac, in the last one, you talked about using the phrase like "God told me," like that comes to mind. How people can use like, "Well, God told me," to sort of add weight to what they want.
Oh yeah.
And of course, there are times when God can tell us things legitimately, 100%. But that, to me, how easily that could be used to manipulate the outcome that I want.
Yeah, we add weight to our words by bringing God into it. And so now we can like force that onto someone else such that if they don't do it or disagree with it, they're not just disagreeing with us, they're disagreeing with God.
Yeah.
Whew.
All right, the next characteristic Mulholland names is destructive. And a lot of these, I feel like are tied together, but to me, this one seems to be, in a way, sort of the outcome of all the things we've been talking about. Like, when you are manipulative, you will inevitably do destruction. You will create destruction. So, and I think the religious false self can be destructive, not because we're necessarily trying to hurt people or trying to cause destruction to relationships, but I think when our faith becomes wrapped up in these fig leaves, these religious fig leaves, when we're not being authentic, that will inevitably impact our relationship with God, our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with the people around us by having a destructive effect, right?
Yes.
So when I'm not being authentic with God, my relationship with him isn't going to grow, it's going to be inhibited. When I'm not being myself, if I'm putting on the fig leaf of performance or, people pleasing with my spouse or with a friend, that's going to do damage to that relationship because I'm not actually showing who I am. I'm showing something other than who I am, which erodes like the integrity of the relationship. So this one is interesting because, again, the whole purpose, I think, of the religious false self in our minds, we're holding it all together. Like we're keeping these fig leaves and we're holding on really, really tightly to them in order to maintain our sense of self-worth, maintain our sense of security, maintain whatever it is we think that God wants us to maintain so that he's happy with us, and so that we can keep moving about in the world, holding it all together. But in reality, underneath the surface, everything's eroding because it's not authentic. It's something other than what's really happening. So all of a sudden we pop the hood and it's like, oh, there's a lot that's messed up. There's a bunch of worms under here or whatever, right? All of a sudden you look
worms. There's worms in an engine.
There's worms in an engine. I'm conflating two metaphors there. Just go with it. What's something that would be in it? Rust. Yeah. There's rust.
Well,
there's rust
when you
under the
watch
hood.
Star Wars, there's that ring thing.
There could be worms in an engine. A friend of mine had rodents in his...
Yeah, that is true.
A friend of mine had rodents in his engine and it started on fire.
Oh my gosh.
So there you go.
You pop the hood and Jabba the Hutt's under there.
And he's got the ring.
You get what I'm saying.
I do get what you're saying, and I think you're right that this it is destructive, and it is the impact of some of these other things that are active in our lives. And in a lot of ways, I see this playing out in the church broadly. This is, I think we need to distinguish between like genuine church hurt and church just being messy because people are messy. But in a lot of ways, we did that series on I forget the title it was. It was sort of like it was like an exodus from the church.
Oh.
De-churching.
The great de-churching. Yeah. And I just think like in a lot of ways, at least one variable that's playing into that is the destructive nature of everything we've been describing being done in God's name. People are leaving the church in droves because people who claim to represent God are operating out of a religious false self, and they've gotten hurt and wounded and sort of disoriented in the process. They've become cynical and are like, I'm done. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be part of that. And again, if I had to weigh in, I think, there's legitimate church hurt. And sometimes I notice like people conflating or confusing relationship that is inherently messy. Name a relationship for me that doesn't involve some mess with church hurt. Those aren't the same. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't go to a church and expect it to be perfect or for never to get messy. If you find that church, I'd love to hear about it. My guess is if you start going to it, you're going to mess it up, listener, because you're not perfect. But you get what I'm saying? So we have to delineate or distinguish between, hey, this is just normal messy stuff that we're actually have to learn to embrace and navigate and mature through versus like this is super destructive and hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's so many relationships get ruined. I can think of people who have had estranged relationships, maybe with their children. In fact, I was just talking to someone. They were sharing how one of their kids kind of walked away from faith, and it was very difficult for them for many, many years. And as they learned to relate to them differently and less with some of those manipulative type of tactics, less of the control of needing to control all of that of what they believed, saw their relationship begin to be restored, and not based on we can be close now because you're a Christian. It's now we can sit and talk about our ideas on things, and I don't need to have so much of that control. And this parent was just talking about like being able to let go of some of that is now helping their relationship be restored.
Yeah, I love that. And again, when we look at the Gospels and how Jesus acts with the religious leaders, most of what he's doing in those interactions is not only exposing the religious false self, but then also highlighting its destructive ripple effects in the relationship with God, on themselves and with other people. And I think if we were to review the Gospels through that lens of like, how is the religious false self impacting those three spheres, those relational spheres, we might be able to see it more clearly in our own lives, right? The next characteristic that Mulholland names in the religious false self is self-promotion. Remember, self-promotion, we sort of outsource our identity to the validation of other people, so life becomes performance-based. We talked about this a little bit with fear and how we can like wrap performance around it. And then we seek validation from other people in order to feel significant. And it seems to me that maybe the current cultural climate with social media and the current predominant church model of pastor-centric ministry creates a perfect recipe for the religious false self to operate with self-promotion. I mean, you just think about all the people on the social influencers who I'm just going to be honest. I get really irritated with religious social influencers who have a platform and can speak to people who follow Jesus and have no responsibility for actually leading them. So, for instance, I'm on this topic. When there's a significant cultural moment and everybody's stirred up about it and it's politically charged, I've noticed social influencers saying things like, if your pastor doesn't address this, fill in the blank, from the pulpit on Sunday, you need to leave and find a different church. It happened with the Charlie Kirk assassination. If your pastor doesn't address it this weekend, you need to find yourself a different church. It happened with some of the stuff in Minnesota. If your pastor doesn't mention this weekend, you need... So it's happening on both the right and the left, and I'm sometimes want to pull my hair out because I'm like, who are you? Who are you? You're a person talking into a camera that has never led a church before.
And you have zero accountability.
To what
you're saying.
And your entire platform is built on self-promotion with no responsibility. Right?
Yeah.
Drives me bonkers. It seems to me that this can obviously happen in a deeper way with pastoral ministry where, and for the church collectively, so pastors can be very self-promoting online and, you know, the entire model of ministry can be built around essentially them promoting themselves and their gifts in order to, quote, build the church. And then churches can be very self-promoting. I've shared before that almost every week I get emails from people who want to help us better promote the Crosspoint brand, right? As if like, if you can enhance your brand, if you can promote Crosspoint more effectively for God, you know, and I don't know, part of me gets really grossed out by it.
Yeah. Don't even get me started on the Christian music industry. Like,
no, I want to get you started. What do you mean?
I
don't even know what you're talking about.
It's all it is. The money goes to the same pockets. It doesn't filter back through church. And people are Christian celebrities and they make music and bless people with it, right? I'm not going to poo-poo on that because I know that it can have an influence as a musician and people and being able to bless people.
You don't believe in music? I think music is motivational. Have you ever heard Chumbawamba? They're so motivating.
Being able to bless people at different times in our church community, like I know it's a gift. However, how do you trust anyone if they're doing it? Like, how do you trust anyone to be doing it for the right reasons when it's so when it produces so much financial gain for them? How could you possibly trust their motives?
It's an interesting question. I don't know.
I just have
I don't know how I would assess that.
I recently was listening to this artist wrote a song, and they were telling the story about how they wrote the song, and they were just like, it's essentially like basically like, I was just sitting around with some friends and kind of this melody came to me, started singing. They're like, that's really good, and it's like, and pretty soon we're all worshiping and it's all great. And it's like, and out came this song that's going to be a platinum hit, and I'm going to be drowning in these riches for a while.
But it's for Jesus.
God is so good.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I how can I trust that it's not more self-promotion?
Yeah.
Would you still write songs if no one heard them?
I really hope that happens to us. Next time we're sitting around a bonfire, Josiah, talking shop, you get out your guitar, you start singing, all of a sudden the melody comes to your
Max
mind.
starts rapping in the
Oh,
background.
yeah. I hit that falsetto note and ruin the song, but somehow it goes platinum.
Press the rap button. Where's the one where you're rapping?
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
I thought there was one where you do
Yeah, and I want to be like, I want to be careful to state that I'm not going to say that it's all evil.
No. No.
But there is so much of this fig leaf in how all of that works.
That industry.
Yes, and I don't have a lot of tolerance for it.
Well, it's everywhere. I mean, so I would love to write a book at some point. I have some ideas of how I used to think I have nothing to contribute. Anything that I would want to talk about, I can point to someone who has already said it and better than I could. Mm-hmm. And there's part of me that still thinks that. There are some things that I think I would like to share with the world. But here's what's the stopper for me is in order to get a contract, oftentimes they're looking at how well you can promote yourself. How many followers do you have on social media? Because you're going to have to you're going to have to put yourself out there repeatedly in a really self-promoting way in order for your book to gain traction. And I struggle with that. I think the solution to this, friends, this is sort of, I've been paying attention to John the Baptist over the last few years. And I was actually in Matthew 3 today where Jesus goes to John to be baptized. And the humility that John consistently demonstrates, it shows up almost every time he speaks. In John chapter 1, when his disciples, John the Baptist's disciples, start following Jesus, some of them express concern, like, oh, they're leaving you to follow him. And he's like, yeah, that's great. He must increase, I must decrease. Then I was reading this morning at Jesus' baptism, Jesus shows up. John knows who Jesus is. And his first inclination was, this ain't right. You should be baptizing me. You're better than I am. You're righteous. I'm not. You need to. I need to repent.
Yeah, I can think of a handful of celebrity pastors that would line up to be the ones to want to baptize Jesus and post it on their social media. Look at me. I got to baptize Jesus. Now, again, this is me being cynical. I don't know these people. I only know them from social media. But I just have a really hard time trusting their motives.
Yes,
when there's so much gain for it in themselves.
The self-promotion is a huge fig leaf with the religious false self. And the way it shows up is becoming a big deal for God is success.
And you don't have to be in ministry to do that.
You don't have to be in ministry. In fact, I know people who have been congregants in our church who have left to start their own ministry in their name. And I'm like, okay, I'm not saying that's all, like, follow what God is asking you to do, like, so on. That's fine. But my goodness, like, underneath that, I want to ask the question, like, is this something God's calling you to, or do you have a mental model where becoming a big deal in terms of ministry is the key to being, that's what it means to be successful? And I want to shift that to say, no, success in the kingdom is about being faithful. And it could involve some attention.
Some people are launched into fame, and it's not necessarily something they sought out.
But there's a big difference, and we talked about this with celebrityism at some point. There's a big difference between becoming a celebrity the goal even if it's for God, versus gaining attention because of how faithfully you're serving. An example of that for me is like a Dallas Willard or a Eugene Peterson who put their voice out there for sure, but they weren't looking to become someone who's notable or well-known. They simply were operating out of their conviction and began to share their transformation in writing, and that's how they become well-known. That's very different than, several dozen people I could list who are clearly like, I want to become known so that, for God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I hear all of that, and I would just want to add, again, I think this is at play with all of us. I think the religious false self is on its own, like about self-promotion, because why else would we be presenting something other than what's aligned with what we actually are? It's to promote ourselves.
Yeah, and
right?
This is all over Jesus' teachings. Like when you pray, go into your prayer closet. Why? Because right now you guys are praying publicly, and when you pray publicly, you're praying for the recognition of other people.
And your reward is here.
Right. Yeah. So there's all sorts of, when you give, don't give, in visible ways. Give so no one notices.
Yeah, I guess maybe that, and just having an epiphany, maybe that's the distinction, is if someone's reward is already here and they're doing it in God's name, it doesn't mean it can't still have a good effect on the kingdom. But I have a really difficult time trusting the motive for it all. If the gain is, if your treasure is here, right? It's like you've received your reward, as Jesus said.
Yeah.
So they've already received it. If you've already received it, I don't know. I just don't trust it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing your cynicism with us.
Yeah. Next on the list, I think we're almost done, right? A couple of more.
Yep.
Is indulgence. So the false self is indulgent. So it seeks personal gain, personal reward for things. I think that as a religious false self, this is where I thought of, and I'll see if this lands. See if this lands with you. I think that the way that we indulge ourselves in a religious context is by not naming God. We name God's blessings, but they ultimately become privileges. So things that are privileges to us can become the thing that is the norm and then the expectation. So we expect God to maintain our lifestyle. So we have expectations about how we're supposed to live around here, maybe. And those expectations of what people around in Lake Country would expect, God might not, like we might cry out to God and say, you're not providing for us, when really it could be a heart issue of just being willing to name, hey, I can name God's blessings for me, and their blessings, they're not, I'm not entitled to them as a privilege.
Okay, let me make sure I'm tracking. So it's almost like this is me trying to wrap what you're saying around my mind.
Yeah.
There's maybe a distinction between wants and needs, and our wants get fulfilled, and we consider those entitled privileges, things we're entitled to because of what we've done for God. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's an expectation that
continues
and gets maintained. And when it doesn't, God, where are you?
Yeah, so like, look at all this stuff I have. And of course, this is God's blessing me for my faithfulness or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like when I've seen that play out in the religious context, it's often with some reference to the Old Testament. You know how in the Old Testament, oftentimes the Israelites did receive some sort of blessing or prosperity as a direct result of covenant faithfulness or obedience. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that can't happen, but I feel like I've heard that connection being drawn. Yeah. See, I did this and now I have this, or I have this and now I have this. And all of a sudden what could be indulgence or
excess.
Is actually, excess, right, is actually more like entitlement.
Right. Yes. In God's name, because of what I've done.
Yeah.
Right. I think one of the things that can happen, and again, this is for people in ministry, but certainly people without it too, is that non-Christian behavior that we associate with fun or pleasure or whatever it is becomes a reward for kingdom ministry. Mm-hmm. So think about all the scandals at play in church leadership again, I've studied this a lot. One of the through lines is like it starts with pastors rewarding themselves with ungodly behavior for all the work they're doing. And I mean, you can see that play out in a much less sinister way than like, an affair or abuse in our everyday life where, I've worked really hard. I'm going to have this coffee ice cream with Heath bars on top. And maybe go back for seconds because I look at what I've done.
Sinful behavior.
I deserve it.
I deserve it.
Sinful.
And I want to name that even in a less overt way of like a tit for tat, like, God, I served you, so I expect you to provide for me. I also think of the, like we have many rights and privileges in America that many other countries don't. People who are following Jesus do not get to expect the same amount of God's blessings as we do. And I struggle with this just as much as anybody living around here, but I think sometimes the way that indulgence shows up in this fig leaf is that we have expectations that God is going to maintain our lifestyle. And although there probably is a semblance of that, like obviously, like if you're not going to be on the street, you're going to be living in a home, and that does require a certain amount of income and all of those things. But I think that I think of the Apostle Paul saying, like, I've learned the secret of being content.
Yeah.
And I just think there's a big part of that, of this fig leaf of indulgence that like is counter to what it is that God's inviting us into, which is the ability to be content in any situation we're in.
I think it's such a good word, Josiah, that one of the way that this fig leaf of indulgence takes on a religious turn or form is we take our indulgence and we reframe it as God's blessing. And I think about Jesus's own a parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Imagine the rich man kind of building bigger barns and seeing and having all this stuff while Lazarus is sitting there dying outside of his gate. But his narrative is, hey, look at all this stuff I've done for God, and this is my reward. And I just wonder, given the inequality that exists around the globe, like how much maybe some of that narrative or framing of it impacts our care for those who don't have what they need.
Yeah.
And I think you're highlighting that.
Yeah. All right. Can I dive us into the last one?
Yeah.
The last one, Mulholland names, is distinction making. And this is, we talked about what it looks like in the last episode, just with the false self generally. But man, this one feels especially prevalent with the religious false self, like in religious leaders, using the kind of us versus them categories. And we do that to, I think, grab onto like a sense of moral superiority. Mm-hmm. We're the Christians that do these things. They do it the other way. It could be denominational. We do it this way, but the Catholics or the Lutherans or Pentecost, whatever. There can be all sorts of spiritual elitism or language around what a real Christian looks like. And we do that to prove to ourselves that we're following Jesus more faithfully. It can show up in parenting. We've talked about parenting before. I can't believe they let their kids do that. Serious Christians would homeschool, or serious Christians would send their kids to private school or even public school. I've heard that comparison made around public school. And it makes me think of that Pharisee tax collector example in Luke 18 where, it's a Pharisee, right, who says, thank God I'm not like the tax collector. Thank God I'm not like him. And so we draw lines and we sort of sort people into categories, into who's in and who's out, in order to make sure we're on the right side of the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the root of judgment, where we sort of detract worth from other people in order to give it to ourselves, versus loving people, which is ascribing worth to others at cost to ourselves. And this distinction making that we do in our religious false self, I think, is one of the primary blockers to our witness to a non-believing world, because instead of loving people, we're judging them. We feel morally superior to non-Christians because look at how they're living and we have it all figured out or whatever. And again, study after study shows that at least in this cultural moment, non-Christians tend to associate Christians not with Christ-like love, but with judgment and hypocrisy. And all of that is rooted in what you're naming, Katie, which is distinction making. Distinction making. I think it's worth at least touching on before we jump into some of the practices for this week that Jesus models something very different for us than all of this false self, religious false self we've been talking about. I mentioned I was in Matthew 3 where Jesus gets baptized. And it's so significant that when Jesus comes out of the water, there's this moment where the Spirit of God lands on Jesus in the form of a dove. And then there's this voice that says, "This is my Son, whom I love and am well pleased." And at that point, Jesus has not started, he hasn't done anything for God. And yet his identity is being fully affirmed. He's receiving his identity. And then before he does anything publicly, that identity is tested. He goes right into the wilderness, and the enemy tempts Jesus 3 times, which I think not only happened, but sort of represent categories in which we all face temptation, which is, hey, turn these stones into bread. Like, try to meet your own needs on your own apart from God. Throw yourself off from the temple where everybody can see, and then they'll know who you are. In other words, perform for other people so they can validate who you are. Or all these kingdoms can be yours if you bow down and worship me. In other words, kind of pulling on that, hey, you could be a big deal. Like, you could be in charge. You could control this whole thing. And Jesus consistently rejects these options and simply rests in who God already says that he is. And after resisting those temptations, he then begins his public ministry, not to get something, but to express who he already is. I want to just hold that out for us to say, hey, the way forward, the solution to our false self and even our religious false self is to receive from God who we already are. And then become increasingly attuned to how often we reverse that. We try to get something rather than express what we've already been given. Make sense?
Yeah. We have a saying in our leadership intensives that every behavioral issue is ultimately an identity issue.
Yeah.
So when you get underneath the surface, the ways that we promote our false self, essentially when we're insecure in who we really are, we will continually promote our false self in order to gain love and affection and our needs, essentially needing to be worthy of it. And when we can learn to recognize how that false self is competing with our true identity, that's where growth can come. But it starts by knowing who we are in Christ first. We have to know that we're the Father's beloved. And I think about this in context with raising my kids. I have a 15-year-old who likes to challenge things, and she
makes an appearance in every episode.
She really does.
Just about.
She would love it, by the way. She would love it. She's getting airtime. But no, this is what I often say. Like I'm frustrated right now because when you're not being honest with me, or we can't talk real about something, and it turns into an argument, like it limits our capacity to have a good relationship. That's why I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated because you did something wrong. I'm curious to know why admitting you did something wrong seems so difficult. And so ultimately, I can see her. There's something underneath there that feels incredibly exposing, just to say, like, yeah, I messed up, and everything is built on, so much of our relationship gets built on this performance and the fig leaves, and so I just see how that plays out, like how God towards us too. Like, you're getting in you're getting in the way. Like, I just want to be with you, and I love you, and there's nothing you can do to add or take away from that.
Yes.
And when you know that, we don't have to keep putting on fig leaves in order to be okay.
Yes. Let me maybe summarize the last two conversations around the false self and the religious false self with this sort of invitation and challenge that Paul gives to the Colossians in chapter 3. He says, do not lie to one another. And I thought I remembered, and then I Googled it, and my memory serves me correctly. That word for lie to one another is pseudomai, which is where we get our word pseudo from. Fake, false. He's saying, don't be false with each other. Stop lying to each other. What if we began to see every fig leaf that we've sewn on to hide or to hustle, to perform or to protect as a form of lying to one another, and began to advocate for one another to take those off in appropriate ways, and started to do that for ourselves with other people? I just think that would be a beautiful, it'd create a beautiful community that works against the destructiveness you were describing, Katie, towards God, towards oneself, and towards others. Mm-hmm. We have to learn to stop lying to one another, knowing that our lying prevents us from living authentically.
Love that. That's a good word.
Praxis Podcast.
Yeah, so how do we do that?
It is praxis time. Here are some practices for you, and I'm going to repeat the first practice from last time, which is to just go through the 8 characteristics Mulholland describes and begin to describe your false self. We can't take off what we can't name. And so the first step is to actually do some reflection. And we all have blind spots, so if you feel like you have a safe person to talk to, you could ask someone else about these characteristics in your life, but you've got to be able to start to identify where they're popping up, where they're showing up in your life and your relationships, so you can begin to take them off.
Yeah, and then related to that would be just to name or describe your religious false self. So take all the categories that you're seeing, all the fig leaves that you're seeing, and then going, okay, are there areas where I'm cloaking that in religious language, or I'm protecting or pleasing in order to preserve some sort of spiritual image? Where am I using God language to promote myself in a way that's not true to how God actually made me?
Yeah. And then practice 3 is to essentially get your identity in Christ. It's one thing to be able to name the false self, but you have to have another voice to counter it. We need good news, gospel in our lives. And so finding resources, scripture verses, things that we can dwell on that sort of can give us, like, when that false self starts coming up, a voice of shame and guilt or fear starts coming up inside us, we have something to counter it with. Oh, I see that as contrary to the way that I am in Christ.
Yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Next time, we're going to talk about the role of first formation when it comes to our false self and showing up inauthentically, because many of the characteristics that maybe are prominent in our lives have been there for a long time and go back to the way we were formed in our families. So stay tuned, and we will see you next time.
Praxis is recorded and produced at Crosspoint Community Church. You can find out more about the show and our church at crosspointwi.com. If you have any questions, comments, or have any suggestions for future topics, feel free to send us an email. Also, if you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.